When you picture God, what comes to mind? For centuries, art and culture have given us a very specific image. He is ancient. He is powerful. He is incredibly, unbelievably serious. We tend to associate the divine with judgment, wrath, holiness, and awe. These are heavy concepts, and in many religious traditions, laughter in sacred spaces is seen as irreverent. You don't crack jokes in a cathedral. But then, you look at the world this very serious God supposedly created, and you have to ask yourself, did the being who designed the giraffe's neck, the ostrich's face, and the sheer absurdity of the naked mole rat, did that being do all of this with a straight face? Today, we're asking a question that sounds trivial, but actually goes deep into theology and philosophy. Does God have a sense of humor? It's a question that makes some people uncomfortable. It feels almost blasphemous to imagine the creator of the universe chuckling. But I'm going to argue that not only does God have a sense of humor, but that a God without one is actually a theological impossibility. Let's dive in. To understand God, theologians often look at humanity. In the book of Genesis, a foundational text for Judaism and Christianity, it states that humans are created in the image of God, the Imago Dei. As it says in Genesis 1:27, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Now think about the human experience. What is one of the most universal, fundamental traits of being a person? Laughter. Humor is how we cope with tragedy. It's how we bond with strangers. It's how we speak truth to power. Proverbs 17:22 even tells us, "A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." A human being completely devoid of humor is usually seen as lacking something essential. There is a basic philosophical principle here. You cannot give what you do not have. If humor is an inherent part of the human blueprint, it had to come from the architect. If God created the capacity for laughter, he must understand the joke. To argue otherwise suggests that creation possesses a complexity and a joy that the creator lacks. They say art reflects the artist. If you look at the natural world, yes, you see majesty and order, but you also see an immense amount of playfulness. Even the psalmist noticed this. In Psalm 104:26, speaking of the ocean, it says, "There the ships go to and fro, and Leviathan, which you formed to frolic there." The word frolic literally means to play. God made a massive sea monster just to watch it play. Consider the sea cucumber, the sloth, the kangaroo, and yes, the platypus. The platypus looks less like intelligent design and more like God hit shuffle on the animal creator settings. If creation is a form of divine self-expression, then God isn't just a rigid mathematician. He's an improvisational artist who enjoys the whimsical and the weird. Now, skeptics might say, okay, nature is funny, but the Bible, the actual text, is terribly serious. To that I say, you aren't reading it right. The Bible is absolutely loaded with wit, irony, and blinding sarcasm. Let's look at the Old Testament. The prophet Elijah. In 1 Kings 18, Elijah is in a showdown with 450 prophets of the storm god Baal. They're trying to call down fire from the sky. They're dancing, shouting, cutting themselves for hours. Nothing happens. And Elijah starts trolling them.
Verse 27 says Elijah mocked them. He shouts, "Shout louder! Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." Some translations politely render, "Maybe he is busy," as "maybe he has wandered away." But the original Hebrew idiom is much earthier. Elijah is essentially asking them if their all-powerful God is currently indisposed in the bathroom. That is some high-level, divine trash talk. Or consider the story of Balaam in Numbers 22. Balaam is a supposedly great pagan seer, a prophet for hire. He's on his way to curse the Israelites, riding his donkey. An angel blocks the path, invisible to Balaam. But the donkey sees the angel. The donkey stops. Balaam beats the donkey. This happens 3 times. Finally, God opens the donkey's mouth. In verse 30, the donkey essentially says, "Am I not your own donkey which you have always ridden to this day? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you?" The humor here is situational irony. The great seer, the man paid big money for his spiritual vision, is totally blind to spiritual reality, while his beast of burden sees everything clearly. The smartest guy in the story is the donkey. That is intentional narrative comedy. Often we miss the humor of Jesus because we read his words with 2,000 years of reverence piled on top. We treat every syllable as a somber decree. But in his first-century context, Jesus was incredibly witty, often using hyperbole, comedic exaggeration, to make a point. In Matthew 19:24, Jesus says, "Again I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God." That's a funny image. It's inherently absurd. It likely got a chuckle from the poor fisherman listening to him. Or take his teaching on judging others. In Matthew 7:3, he asks, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye?" This is slapstick. It's a Looney Tunes image meant to highlight hypocrisy. If you read that without seeing the twinkle in Jesus' eye, you're missing half the communication. He even gave his disciples humorous nicknames. In Mark 3:17, it tells us he gave James and John the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. Considering these 2 brothers once wanted to call down fire on a village, that nickname is affectionate, but it's definitely a tease. Why does this matter? Why spend 10 minutes arguing that God might appreciate a good joke? Because a humorless God is a terrifying concept. A God without humor is robotic, distant, and ultimately less complex than we are. The great Christian thinkers like C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton argued that humor is a close relative of joy, and joy is central to the divine nature. Psalm 126 verse 2 paints a picture of restoration, saying, "Our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy." Humor is a way of looking at a fallen, broken world, admitting the absurdity of it, and finding a way to survive it. It's a coping mechanism, yes, but it's also a glimpse of something better. If the ultimate story of reality is a tragedy, if in the end entropy wins and the universe freezes over, then nothing is funny. But if the ultimate story is a comedy in the classical sense, a story that starts poorly but ends happily in a wedding or a feast, then humor is a foretaste of that ultimate victory. So does God have a sense of humor? Look at the platypus. Look at your best friend's laugh. Look at the absurd irony of a donkey outsmarting a prophet. I think the answer is yes. I think God not only gets the joke, I think he wrote it. What do you think? Is it irreverent to think of God laughing? Or does it make the divine seem more real to you? Let me know your thoughts and your favorite examples of accidental biblical humor in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please leave a like and subscribe for more theological and philosophical investigations. Thanks for watching.